The steppe was a sea without end, an ocean not of water but of grass. In spring it rolled in waves of green, dotted with the dark bodies of grazing horses. In winter it became a white wasteland, the snow swept into ridges by the merciless wind. Nothing stayed still for long. Herds moved with the seasons, families packed their tents onto wagons and followed them, and the sky itself seemed to shift with each passing cloud. To outsiders, the land looked empty. To those who belonged to it, it was alive with spirits, voices, and fate. One cold dawn in the year 1162, a boy came into that world, clenched tight around a clot of blood. The women who attended his mother gasped at the sight and whispered omens. "This child will hold life and death in his fist," one said. "He will spill blood, or he will rule it." His mother, Hoelin, exhausted from the pains of labor, only looked at him with dark eyes that carried both love and sorrow. She had been taken from her people years before, carried off by the Borgigian chief Yasugii, who had killed her husband to have her. She had learned to live with it, as women on the steppe often did, and she had borne him children already. But this boy felt different, heavier with fate. Yasugii named him Temujin, after a Tatar enemy he had slain. To give the child an enemy's name was to bind his strength to the boy's spirit. From his first breath, Temujin carried both conquest and vengeance within him. Life on the steppe gave no child time to be weak. By the age of 3, Temujin was on a pony, clinging to its mane with chubby fists, learning balance by falling again and again into the dust. Hoelin laughed when he rose, bloodied lip trembling but refusing to cry. "My son," she told him, "the sky spares no one. If you fall and do not rise, the earth will swallow you. If you rise, the sky will carry you." Yasugii was not often at home. He led raids against Tatars, Merkits, and other tribes, fighting for honor, revenge, and survival. But when he returned, he taught his son the bow, the knife, and the way of men. "The world gives nothing," he said, his voice harsh with smoke and drink. "Everything is taken, even wives, even children. You must have teeth like the wolf, Temujin, or you will be meat for others." Temujin listened, eyes wide, storing each word like arrows in a quiver. He was not the only child. Hoelin's tent was filled with noise, Kasar, fierce and hot-blooded. Hakian, quieter but loyal. Temuj, youngest and spoiled, and daughters whose names would later be forgotten by history, but who labored beside their mother. They played, quarreled, fought, and shared the gnawing hunger of lean winters. Sometimes they had milk, sometimes nothing but wild roots scraped from frozen soil. Temujin's earliest memories were of contrasts. The warm musk of horses pressed close together on winter nights, the stinging lash of wind that seemed to slice through clothing and skin, the laughter of brothers in the grasslands, and the low, serious songs of his mother by the fire. Hoelin was his anchor, her voice firm even when the world betrayed them. When Temujin was 9, his father took him on a journey. They rode for days across the plains until they reached the encampment of the Angeret. Their felt tents stood clustered like white mushrooms, their herds grazing in the distance. Yasugii had come to secure his son's future. In the way of the steppe, alliances were made not only by oath but by marriage. There, Temujin was betrothed to a girl named Borte, daughter of an Angeret noble. She was still a child, as was he, but when their eyes met there was a spark of shyness, of curiosity. She would one day become his wife, though neither knew what storms would come before then. Temujin remained a short time with her family, a guest among strangers, but already bound to Borte by promise. Yasugii, proud of the match, set off for home. On the way, he encountered a band of Tatars, bitter enemies of the Borgigian. But the steppe had laws older than hatred. Hospitality could not be denied, and the Tatars offered him meat and drink. To refuse was insult, to accept was trust. Yasugii ate. What he did not know was that the food was poisoned. By the time he reached his people, He was sick with fever, his body burning, his breath shallow. He lay upon his bedding, summoning Temujin to his side. "Listen, my son," he rasped, his hand clutching the boy's arm with desperate strength. "The world is filled with wolves. Trust no promise but your own. If you want power, you must seize it with both hands. If you want life, you must be ready to kill for it." Temujin's heart hammered in his chest. He wanted to beg his father not to leave, but the words stuck in his throat. He only nodded. Yasuji's grip loosened. His eyes closed. The great chief of the Borjigin was dead. And with his death, everything fell apart. The camp mourned Yasuji only briefly. Death was common on the steppe, and alliances built on his strength crumbled as quickly as the smoke of his funeral fire. Men who had once drunk beside him now rode away with their families and herds, muttering that Hoelin could not lead, that her sons were too young, that wolves would devour them all. Within days, the Borjigin camp was empty. The felt tents were gone. The smoke vanished. Only Hoelin remained, her children clustered around her, and the bare, trampled grass where their kin had stood. Temujin watched them go, rage and fear twisting in his chest. "They leave us to die," he whispered. Hoelin's face was carved in iron. She placed her hands on her son's shoulders and forced him to meet her eyes. "They were never ours to begin with. Remember this, men follow only strength. If you would lead them one day, you must be stronger than their fear. Until then, we live as wolves live, hungry, sharp, and unseen." The wolves were their rivals now. That winter was cruel, the wind cutting through every crack of their tent, the snow deep enough to swallow ponies whole. With no herds to sustain them, they lived on roots and berries when they could find them, on fish pulled with frozen fingers from the Onon River. Temujin's brothers grew thin, their faces hollow, their ribs sharp under their skin. The youngest cried from hunger until their mother hushed them with songs, rocking them even when her own body shook from weakness. One day, Temujin and his half-brother Bektar brought back a rabbit snared in the grasses. It was hardly more than a mouthful, but their eyes devoured it as though it were a whole sheep. As they prepared to divide it, Bektar's hand closed over the animal. "I am eldest," he said. "By right, I take the first share." Temujin's stomach burned with hunger. He saw Kasar's eyes flick to him, fierce, ready. Their mother's lessons echoed in Temujin's mind. If you yield once, you yield forever. When Bektar turned away, Temujin and Kasar struck together. Their knives flashed sharp as desperation. Bektar fell in the dust, blood staining the pale grass. Silence followed. The rabbit lay forgotten between them. Hoelin's scream tore the air when she found them. She beat her chest, tore her hair, and cursed the sons she loved. "You have killed your brother," she cried. "Blood calls to blood. The sky will see this and judge you." But Temujin stood trembling, his knife still in his hand, and something inside him hardened. He did not regret. He had chosen survival. That night, Hoelin wept by the fire, her face hidden in her hands. Temujin sat apart, staring into the flames, feeling their heat sting his eyes. He swore to himself that he would never again live at the mercy of others, not of brothers, not of tribes, not of fate. Years passed, and the boy grew into a youth with eyes too sharp for his age. He hunted alone, he fought with his brothers, he endured. But fate had more trials yet. At 12, Temujin rode out with his brothers to hunt marmot. The day was bright, the grass golden under the late summer sun. He carried a bow on his back, his heart light with the thought of meat for the pot. But shadows moved among the hills, and before he could call a warning, horsemen erupted around them. The Teichud, enemies of his father, they had not forgotten the Borjigin boy. Their leader laughed as they seized him, dragging him from his pony. His bow clattered to the ground, useless. He kicked and fought, but they bound his wrists and dragged him back to their camp. There, they fastened a heavy wooden kang around his neck, 2 slabs of timber clamped together, so heavy he could scarcely lift his head. The wood bit into his skin, the weight bowed his shoulders. They paraded him before their people, jeering, spitting, mocking him. "Here is Yasujiai's son," they said. "See how he crawls now." For weeks he was their prisoner. He labored under the Kang, fetching water, stumbling in the dust while children pelted him with stones. At night, he lay awake beneath the stars, the wood pressing against his neck, his muscles burning. But his mind did not yield. He studied the camp, noted which guards drank too heavily, which paths led to the river, which dogs barked and which slept. One night opportunity came. His guard was drunk, snoring loudly by the fire. Temujin crept away, the Kang dragging at him with every step. He moved like a shadow, slipping between tents, heart hammering. Dogs barked, men stirred, but he reached the river and waded into its dark waters. The Kang floated, holding his head barely above the surface. He hid among the reeds as voices shouted in the distance, torches flaring across the camp. The searchers passed by. The boy in the river held his breath, his eyes just above the waterline. He waited until the stars wheeled overhead, until the shouting faded. Then he dragged himself from the river, cold and shaking, and fled into the night. Days later, exhausted and bleeding from the raw wood that had rubbed his neck raw, he found his family again. They wept at the sight of him, but Temujin only bowed his head and said, "I will not wear chains again." He was 12 years old. The seasons turned, and the years passed over the outcast family like the wind across the steppe. Temujin grew taller, his shoulders broadening with the work of hunting, riding, and survival. His hands grew calloused, his face hardened. But he did not forget the weight of the Kang or the laughter of the Teichiudi. He carried that shame like a blade hidden under his ribs, and it cut him every time he thought of it. Life with his mother and brothers was a rhythm of hardship. Each dawn began with the gathering of what little they had. The herds too small to keep them fed, the worn tools that bent and broke under hard use, the felt tent patched so many times it seemed more scar than fabric. Hoelin bore it all without flinching. She rose before the sun, her hair stiff with frost, coaxed what milk she could from the thin maras, sent her sons out to fish or trap, and reminded them daily of the law of the steppe. No one would help them but themselves. Temujin often rode far, seeking food or allies. On one such ride, when he was still little more than a boy, his horses were stolen. Most would have cursed and given up, but Temujin tracked them, alone, across the wide grassland. He followed the faintest marks, a clump of grass bent by hooves, a patch of disturbed soil. Days into the pursuit, he came upon a youth tending his own herd. The boy was named Baorshu. He listened as Temujin spoke of his stolen horses, of his determination to get them back. There was something in Temujin's eyes that caught him, a fire, a resolve that spoke of destiny. Baorshu agreed to help. Together, they rode after the thieves, and together they fought to reclaim the herd. From that day forward, Baorshu never left Temujin's side. Not long after, another youth joined him. Jelm, strong of body and loyal beyond question. Stories would later tell of how Jelm once gave Temujin water from his own mouth when the young leader lay dying of wounds. But even then his devotion was clear. With each companion, Temujin's strength grew, not in numbers, but in the kind of men who followed him. These were not bound to him by blood or clan, but by choice, by respect, by belief. It was a new way of leading on the steppe. As Temujin reached manhood, he sought out old ties. He returned to the Angeret to claim Borte, the girl he had been promised as a child. She had grown into a young woman, strong and steady, her eyes reflecting both intelligence and resolve. Their marriage was not only alliance but also affection, and Temujin found in her a partner of rare loyalty. Borte would endure every hardship with him, and though he would take other wives, she remained first in his heart. With Borte at his side and a handful of loyal companions, Temujin's star began to rise. But power on the steppe was a game of alliances, shifting and treacherous as the wind. He sought out his childhood friend Jamukha, son of a noble lineage. They embraced as brothers, and in the old tradition, they swore the Anda oath, cutting themselves so their blood mingled, pledging eternal loyalty. For a time, their bond was strong. They raided together, hunted together, built their followings side by side. At night, beneath the endless sky, they shared drink and dreams. Jamukha spoke of power, of ruling as their ancestors had, by the strength of noble birth. Temujin spoke instead of loyalty, of merit, of raising up the strong no matter their clan. Jamukha laughed, indulgent, thinking Temujin's ideas naive. But the differences between them were already deep. As months turned to years, the division grew. Temujin's camp was disciplined. His men organized into groups that ignored clan ties. 10, 100, 1,000 each bound by command, not by blood. He rewarded courage, punished betrayal, divided spoils fairly. Among his men, there was order where before there had been chaos. Jamukha, though greater in numbers, clung to the old ways. His men fought for their own glory, took what they could seize, followed because he was noble, not because he was just. At last, the two blood brothers could not remain as one. Jamukha declared himself Gurkhan, universal ruler, and demanded Temujin bend the knee. Temujin refused. "I will not kneel to birth," he said, "only to strength and loyalty." The Anda oath was broken. War followed. Jamukha brought 30,000 men. Temujin had scarcely 20,000. Yet the discipline of Temujin's followers cut deep into Jamukha's numbers. Battles raged across the grassland, the thunder of hooves and the hiss of arrows filling the air. At first Temujin held his own, striking with cunning ambushes, retreating only to lure Jamukha into traps. But betrayal came. Some of Temujin's men, swayed by old kinship, abandoned him. Jamukha struck hard. After a brutal fight, he captured 70 young warriors from Temujin's ranks. To prove his power and terrify his enemies, Jamukha ordered them boiled alive. The cruelty shocked the steppe. Even those who feared Temujin began to see in him a leader who did not descend to such madness. Warriors deserted Jamukha, trickling into Temujin's camp, swearing loyalty. Temujin did not forget the lesson. Strength alone was not enough. Justice mattered. Fairness mattered. If he was to bind the tribes into something greater than endless blood feuds, he would need to be more than a warrior. He would need to be a lawgiver. And so, under the eternal blue sky, the man who had once been an outcast began to shape himself into a Khan. The steppe trembled with change. The defeat at Jamukha's hands left scars that did not fade quickly. For days after the battle, the grass was stained with blood, bodies left where they had fallen, crows circling above. Temujin led his battered followers away from the killing ground. Their numbers halved, their spirits heavy. Some limped from wounds. Others rode with vacant eyes, their brothers and sons lying behind them in shallow graves. But though the men were weary, they did not abandon him. They had seen Jamukha's cruelty. They had smelled the steam rising from the cauldrons where 70 young men had been boiled alive. Such horror drove them not into despair but into resolve. They whispered among themselves that Temujin was different, that he divided spoils fairly, that he punished the guilty but protected the innocent, that he was no slave to noble blood but a leader for all men. When Temujin spoke to them, his voice was not the voice of defeat. "We have been broken before," he said, standing before the embers of their campfire, his face lit by flame. "When my father died, our kin left us to starve. When the Taechud chained me, I carried their wood and wore their mockery. When Bektor stole from us, I raised my hand against my own blood. Each time I fell, but each time I rose. The wolf does not die because it is wounded. The wolf endures, and in time the wolf hunts again." His men listened, heads bowed, their grief hardening into loyalty. Through the seasons that followed, Temujin rebuilt his strength. He rode the length of the steppe, gathering followers from tribes who had been betrayed by Jamuka or were weary of endless feuds. He offered not only plunder but order. He promised justice under a new law, the Yasa, which would be obeyed by all, noble and poor alike. No theft of livestock would be tolerated, no betrayal forgiven, no woman taken without right. It was harsh, but it was fair, and in fairness men found hope. One by one, warriors pledged to him. Some came with families, some alone, but all came with the same hunger, to belong to something greater. Temujin did not reject them. He divided them into units of tens, hundreds, and thousands, tearing apart the old ties of clan and blood. In their place, he bound them with discipline. No longer will you fight beside cousin and brother only, he told them. You will fight beside those I place you with. Your brother is the one who shares your fire and obeys my word. If a man betrays, all will be punished. If a man shows courage, all will share his reward. This system spread like fire in dry grass. Men found themselves part of something stronger than kinship, an army of wolves moving as one. By the time a great council, the Kuriltai, was called, Temujin's power had swollen like a storm cloud. Chiefs came from across the plains. From the Karite, the Naaman, the smaller tribes scattered like driftwood across the sea of grass. They gathered on the banks of the Onon River, the sky above clear and endless, the earth trembling with the hooves of countless horses. Tents were raised, fires lit, meat roasted. The air rang with the cries of herds and the laughter of children, but beneath it ran a current of tension. All had come to see whether this young man, son of Yasujii, once an exile and a slave, could truly claim what no one had held in centuries, the loyalty of the Mongols as one people. On the appointed day, Temujin stepped into the circle of leaders. He wore armor of hardened leather, scarred from battle, and a sable hat that marked his rank. His face was stern, his eyes hard as obsidian. He spoke of the past, of fathers betrayed, of brothers lost, of tribes scattered by greed and cruelty. He spoke of Jamuka's madness, of the 70 men boiled alive, of the chaos that had consumed the steppe for generations. Then he raised his hand to the sky. The eternal blue sky does not bless men who tear each other apart. Alone, each tribe is meat for wolves. Together, we will be the wolves. Together, we will be the storm that sweeps the earth. No longer Borjigin or Taichiudi or Angjarat. From this day, we are one people, Mongol. And I am your Khan, not by blood, but by strength and by law. The chiefs murmured. Some shifted uneasily, but more nodded, their eyes fierce with recognition. Slowly, one by one, they stepped forward. They lifted him upon a felt carpet, raised him high so all could see, and turned in a circle beneath the sky. Thus Temujin was proclaimed Genghis Khan, ruler of all Mongols. A cry rose from the crowd, echoing across the riverbanks, rolling over the grasslands like thunder. Warriors beat their shields, horses reared, women lifted their children to the sky as if to show them the future. The steppe, fractured for centuries, was at last bound together under one man. But Genghis Khan's eyes were not turned inward. Already he looked beyond the horizon. The tribes were united, yes, but the world was vast, filled with kingdoms that believed themselves untouchable. South lay the Tangut of Shisya, fat with trade and tribute. Beyond them, the Jin dynasty, rich with silk and gold, arrogant behind their walls. To the west, the Khwarezm Shah, master of cities that shone like jewels on the Silk Road. The storm was ready. The steppe had found its master, and the world would soon tremble. The winter winds bit deep as the Mongols rode south. Snow swirled in the open sky, but beneath the riders' hooves the steppe was alive with thunder. Herds of horses, flocks of sheep, carts piled with felt tents and weapons. The whole nation moved, not as scattered tribes any longer, but as one vast body, one breath, one heartbeat. At their head rode Genghis Khan. He was no longer the boy Temujin who had once starved in the reeds, no longer the fugitive with a wooden collar around his neck. He rode tall, his shoulders wrapped in wolf fur, his bow resting at his side, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Behind him followed tens of thousands of horsemen, each armed with the same composite bow, each hardened by discipline and law. They moved like a tide, silent when they must, swift as the falcon's strike. The tribes of the Mongol steppe had long raided their neighbors, riding south to plunder and then retreating back into the grasslands. But this march was different. This was not a raid. This was conquest. Their first target was the Tangut kingdom of Xixia, a proud land nestled between desert and mountain, a realm of caravan routes and oasis cities. The Tangut lords, rich from silk and trade, thought themselves safe behind their high walls. But Genghis Khan carried the wrath of the eternal blue sky, and walls were only stone. The Mongols crossed the Gobi Desert like spirits. The Tangut scouts reported their approach too late. By the time word reached the cities, the horsemen were already upon them. The first to fall was Wulahai, a frontier fortress. Its defenders had grown fat and slow and used to real war. The Mongols encircled it in a day, cutting off all escape. Arrows rained from every direction, shafts whistling like locusts. When the defenders tried to sally forth, they found themselves trapped in a storm of mounted archers who fired, wheeled, and vanished before counterattack. Inside the walls, panic spread. Supplies dwindled, water ran short. At night, the defenders could hear the Mongols' drums echoing across the dark plain, beating like a giant heart. After only a few weeks, Wulahai opened its gates. But surrender did not save them. Genghis Khan spared no one who resisted too long. The fortress was burned, its wealth taken, its people scattered into slavery. News of the devastation rode on the wind, reaching the ears of other Tangut towns. The Mongols pressed deeper, their horsemen fanning out across the land. They struck caravan routes, seized oases, cut trade lines. Cities that resisted were surrounded, starved, and stormed. The Mongols were not only warriors but engineers. With each conquest, they forced captured artisans to build siege machines. Catapults hurled stones, siege towers rolled forward, rams shattered gates. The Tangut had thought the nomads incapable of such war, but Genghis Khan had turned their own knowledge against them. By the second year of the campaign, the Tangut rulers grew desperate. Their king, Lianchuan, sent envoys to plead for peace. They carried gifts, silk, silver, golden vessels, and swore loyalty to Genghis Khan if only he would spare their land. Genghis Khan listened in silence as the envoys bowed. His generals, Subutai and Jebe, urged him to finish the conquest. But the Khan, ever pragmatic, saw further. The Tangut were useful. Their submission meant supplies, tribute, and a base for future campaigns against the far richer Jin dynasty. To crush them entirely would gain him ash and rubble. To bind them as vassals would gain him strength. And so he accepted their surrender. "You will provide soldiers when I call," he told the Tangut king. "You will open your roads to my caravans. You will bow to the eternal blue sky. Defy me, and there will be no Tangut kingdom left to remember." Lianchuan bent the knee. Xixia was spared for now. The Mongols rode north again, heavy with plunder, their herds fattened, their spirits unbroken. The tribes that had once fought each other now returned as conquerors. The Tangut were subdued, their walls humbled, their rulers trembling in obedience. But this was only the beginning. Genghis Khan had tested his horde against the cities of the south and found that the walls of men were no true shield. Now he looked beyond Xixia to the vast and glittering lands of the Jin dynasty. Their capital, Zhongdu, today's Beijing, was one of the richest cities in the world, swollen with merchants, artisans, scholars, and soldiers. The Jin had once mocked the Mongols as wild dogs, unworthy of tribute. Soon they would learn that the wild dogs had become wolves, and the wolves hunted in packs. Genghis Khan turned his horse toward the east. His gaze was sharp as an arrowhead, his voice cold as the desert wind. "The Tangut bowed," he said. "The Jin will break." The drums began again, rolling across the steppe, summoning every rider to the saddle. The storm was gathering. The grasslands were still dusted with the frost of early spring when the Khan called his men again. Messengers galloped in all directions, carrying his command on swift horses. Every warrior was to muster, every family to prepare their herds for the long march east. The Tangut had bowed, but their submission was only a first step. The eternal blue sky demanded more. The target now was the Jin dynasty, the great empire that ruled the rich northern plains of China. Its emperors sat in palaces of carved stone and painted silk, their granaries bursting, their cities teeming with millions. For centuries, the Jin had demanded tribute from the steppe, forcing nomad chiefs to kneel and pay for peace. But the balance of power had shifted. The nomads no longer rode as scattered raiders. They rode under one banner, united as Mongols. When Genghis Khan gathered his men at the Caroline River, the camp stretched farther than the eye could see. Felt tents rose like a sea of white domes, smoke drifting from their roofs. Herds of horses grazed on the plain, their numbers beyond counting. Women tended fires and prepared dried meat, while smiths hammered arrowheads and sharpened sabers. Children ran between the yurts, shouting in play, unaware that they were the sons and daughters of an army about to change the world. The warriors assembled in their units of 10, 100,000, and 10,000. Discipline was strict. A man who disobeyed his commander was whipped or executed. A man who showed courage was rewarded on the spot. No one fought for his clan alone anymore. He fought for the horde. Genghis Khan rode before them on a dun-colored stallion, his armor gleaming with polished plates, his sable cloak trailing in the wind. His face was weathered, his eyes cold and unwavering. "The Jin think themselves safe behind walls of stone," he said, his voice carrying across the vast plain. "They sit in their palaces and call us wild dogs. Let them see what dogs can do. Let them hear the thunder of our hooves. Let them taste the fire of our arrows. The eternal blue sky gives us this land, and we will take it." The warriors roared in answer, a sound like a mountain splitting. And so the march began. The Mongols poured into Jin territory like a flood. First they struck the frontier forts, small garrisons of stone and timber. The defenders fired arrows from the walls, but the Mongols were too swift, riding around the battlements, cutting off supplies, choking every attempt at relief. Siege machines, built by Chinese captives from the Tangut War, hurled stones and firepots over the walls. Within weeks, the forts fell. Then came the towns, prosperous places along the caravan routes, filled with markets, grain stores, and frightened citizens. The Mongols showed no mercy to those who resisted. Towns that opened their gates were spared. Those that defied were burned to ash. Word spread quickly, and panic followed. Farmers abandoned their fields, fleeing south. Merchants closed their shops and vanished. Soldiers muttered of omens, claiming the blue sky had turned against the Jin. By the second year of the war, the Mongols were deep in Jin territory. They moved in multiple columns, striking in all directions, always reuniting like the strands of a whip. The Jin armies, larger on paper, were clumsy and slow. Their generals quarreled over strategy. Their troops were weighed down by baggage. Against the lightning speed of the Mongol horsemen, they were helpless. One army after another was encircled and destroyed. The Mongols would feign retreat, scattering like startled deer, luring their pursuers into valleys and plains. Then, with a sudden blast of horns, the retreating horsemen would wheel about, joined by hidden forces waiting on the flanks. The trap would close, arrows would pour like rain, and the Jin soldiers would die in heaps. At last, the road to Zhongdu, the great capital, today's Beijing, lay open. Zhongdu was no steppe camp or frontier town. It was a city of stone walls so high that they seemed to scrape the belly of the sky. Towers rose above them, hung with banners. Inside were palaces, markets, temples, lakes, gardens, and a population of more than 1 million souls. The Mongols had never before faced such a challenge. Genghis Khan studied the city from a rise of land, his cloak snapping in the wind. His generals gathered around. Subutai, lean and cunning. Jeeb, fearless as a hawk. Jelm and Boorshu, his lifelong companions. They discussed for hours, but the Khan's face never changed. "We cannot storm these walls with arrows alone," he said at last. "We will starve them. We will burn them. We will make them beg to open their gates." The siege began. The Mongols encircled Zhongdu in a ring of iron. Camps stretched for miles. Watchtowers were raised. Patrols cut off every road. No one could enter or leave. Then came the siege machines. Trebuchets hurling boulders that shattered rooftops. Catapults launching jars of flaming oil. Great rams pounding against the gates. Prisoners were driven before the walls, forced to fill the moats with earth and timber. Inside the city, fear spread like fire. Granaries were emptied, then rationed. The wealthy hoarded what food they had, while the poor starved. Corpses lay in the streets, dogs tearing at the flesh. Still the defenders held, manning the walls with crossbows and firepots, hurling curses at the enemy below. The Mongols answered with cruelty of their own. They captured villagers from the countryside and drove them before the walls, forcing them to act as human shields while the siege engines advanced. They catapulted severed heads into the streets to spread terror. For months, Zhongdu endured. But hunger was a sharper weapon than steel. By the summer of 1215, the gates opened at last. The Jin emperor had already fled south, leaving the city to its fate. The Mongols poured in. What followed was fire and slaughter. Streets ran with blood. Palaces burned. Towers collapsed. Temples toppled. The treasures of centuries were carried away on Mongol horses. Those who resisted were killed. Those who submitted were enslaved. By the time the fires died, Zhongdu was a blackened ruin, its people broken, its greatness reduced to ash. Genghis Khan rode through the smoldering streets. He said nothing, but his eyes took in the sight. This was no longer a simple raid for plunder. This was empire. The Jin dynasty, though not yet destroyed, had been crippled. Its wealth was stripped, its prestige shattered, its people cowed. The Mongols returned to the steppe richer than any nomads in memory, their carts heavy with silk, gold, jade, and slaves. But Genghis Khan was not finished. He had shown the world that no city was too great, no wall too high, no empire too mighty. And in his heart, already, he was thinking of lands beyond the horizon. Kingdoms to the west, rich with trade, swollen with pride. The eternal blue sky had no borders, and neither soon would he. The smoke of Zhongdu's ruins still clung to the Mongol banners when word came from the west. Traders whispered of a great empire, rich beyond measure, sprawling across the deserts and rivers of Central Asia, the realm of the Khwarezm Shah. His cities glittered like jewels along the Silk Road. Samarkand, Bokhara, Urgench. Their markets overflowed with spices, gold, silks, and manuscripts. Their walls were high, their armies vast. Genghis Khan listened. He was not a man drunk on blood alone. He thought of trade, of wealth flowing across the world, of merchants riding safely from China to the Caspian Sea under his protection. For the first time in history, the steppe and the cities could be bound together, not only by conquest but by commerce. And so he sent envoys westward. They carried gifts of silk and gold, a message of friendship, and a proposal. Let us trade in peace. Let the caravans pass unharmed. There is enough wealth in the world for both of us. But the Shah of Khwarezm, Muhammad II, was proud. He looked at the gifts and saw insult, not respect. He listened to his advisors, who sneered at the thought of steppe nomads pretending to be equals. To him, the Mongols were still barbarians, fit only to raid and plunder. When the Mongol caravan reached the city of Otrar, it was seized by the governor. The merchants were accused of spying. Their goods were confiscated, and on the Shah's command, they were executed. When word of this outrage reached Genghis Khan, he was silent for a long time. Then, with measured calm, he sent 3 envoys directly to the Shah himself, demanding justice. It was not too late for peace, but the Shah made a fatal mistake. He had one envoy killed, and the others sent back mutilated. The insult was total. The Khan's envoys, the sacred messengers of the steppe, had been murdered. When Genghis Khan heard, he clenched his fists. His voice, when he spoke, was like iron striking stone. "He has cut the throat of peace," he said. "Now let him taste war." The Mongol horde moved westward like a storm front. It was 1219, and the world would never be the same again. Genghis Khan gathered perhaps 200,000 horsemen. Though exact numbers matter little, each Mongol warrior was worth many times his weight in enemies. They rode in disciplined columns, carrying with them siege engineers from China, catapults, mangonels, rams, and towers. This was no mere cavalry raid. This was an army of annihilation. The first city to fall was Bokhara. Bokhara was a jewel of Islam, a city of mosques, bazaars, scholars, and artisans. Its walls were high, its defenders numerous. Yet when the Mongols arrived, they moved with such swiftness and precision that the defenders scarcely understood what was happening. Siege machines battered the gates, towers loomed against the walls, and Mongol soldiers swarmed like ants. Within days, the city surrendered. The people gathered in the great mosque, trembling as the conqueror entered. Genghis Khan himself rode inside, dismounting at the pulpit. He looked upon the crowd, their eyes wide with fear. "I am the punishment of God," he said, his voice echoing against the stone. "If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." The words chilled every heart. Bokhara was plundered, its wealth stripped, its people slaughtered or enslaved. Those who resisted were cut down without mercy. Only a handful of artisans and scholars were spared, taken east to serve the Mongols. From Bokhara, the horde moved to Samarkand, the Shah's proudest jewel. Its armies numbered in the tens of thousands, bolstered by war elephants clad in armor. But discipline was lacking. The Shah had fled, leaving generals to quarrel and soldiers to falter. The Mongols encircled the city with a ring of fire. Siege engines hurled boulders, arrows rained in storms, rams pounded the gates. War elephants charged, but the Mongols loosed volleys of flaming arrows, panicking the beasts. The elephants turned back, trampling their own men. Chaos spread, and the Mongols surged forward. Samarkand fell. Its garrisons were executed, its people scattered. The survivors spoke in hushed voices of the fury of the steppe, of horsemen who seemed to come from the very horizon itself. The Shah fled again, abandoning his empire. He crossed rivers, mountains, deserts, always pursued but never caught. He died in exile on a lonely island in the Caspian Sea, a broken man, haunted by the knowledge that he had unleashed his own doom. But the Mongols did not stop with his death. They spread across Khwarezm like fire through dry grass. City after city fell: Urgench, Termez, Nishapur, Merv. Some surrendered and were spared for a time. Others resisted and were erased from the earth. The massacres were terrible. At Merv, it is said, every inhabitant, more than 100,000 souls, was killed, their bodies stacked in heaps. At Nishapur, After a Mongol commander was slain, the entire population was put to death, their skulls piled in pyramids outside the gates. Whether numbers were exaggerated by chroniclers or not, the terror was real. The name of Genghis Khan spread like a curse across the Muslim world. And yet, behind the terror was cold calculation. The Khan did not kill for madness alone. Each city destroyed was a lesson. Those who resisted would be erased. Those who surrendered early might be spared and taxed. Over time, the legend of Mongol vengeance became as powerful a weapon as their bows and horses. By the time the campaign ended, the Khwarezmian Empire no longer existed. Its cities lay in ruins, its people scattered, its rulers dead or in hiding. The Silk Road, once guarded by Khwarezm, now belonged to the Mongols. Genghis Khan returned to the steppe, his carts groaning with plunder, his empire stretching farther than any nomad had ever dreamed. From the Yellow River to the Caspian Sea, the land bowed to him, and still his gaze reached beyond. To the west lay new lands, strange kingdoms, even the edges of Europe itself. To the south, the Caliphate of Baghdad. To the east, the Song dynasty of China. The world was wide, and the sky eternal. The storm was not spent. It had only begun. When the Shah of Khwarezm lay dying in exile, abandoned even by the gods he had once invoked, the Mongols were not finished. Genghis Khan had shattered an empire, but he was not content with mere victory. He was a man who tested the edges of the map, who sought to know how far the eternal blue sky stretched. To the west, beyond the ruins of Khwarezm, lay lands unknown to most Mongols. The Caucasus Mountains, the Black Sea, the steppes of the Kipchaks, and the strange kingdoms of the Rus. Their names were murmured by traders, half in awe and half in fear. Genghis Khan had no need to conquer them outright, not yet. But he would send his most brilliant generals on a mission of fire and thunder, to scout, to destroy, to test the strength of these distant lands. He chose Subutai the Valiant and Jebe the Arrow. They were wolves among wolves. Subutai, born of a humble herder's family, a master of strategy who could read the battlefield like a scroll. Jebe, once an enemy soldier who had loosed an arrow into Temujin's neck, spared by the Khan and remade into one of his greatest commanders. Together, they were unleashed with perhaps 20,000 men. A small horde by Mongol standards, but enough to carve a scar across half the world. The march began in 1221. They swept across Persia, leaving flames in their wake, then turned north into the Caucasus. There, the mountain tribes gathered against them, Georgians, Alans, Kipchaks. The Mongols did not meet them in open battle. Instead, they played their favorite trick, the feigned retreat. For days, they pretended to flee, dragging the enemy armies after them. The Alans and Kipchaks, confident of victory, broke into disorder as they pursued. At the moment of greatest arrogance, Subutai gave the signal. Horns blasted, dust rose, and the Mongol columns turned back like a striking serpent. From the hills emerged hidden wings of horsemen who had waited silently. The trap closed. The coalition army was cut to pieces. The survivors fled, carrying tales of demons on horseback who could not be defeated. The Mongols pressed on, crossing the Black Sea steppe. In 1223, they reached the lands of the Rus principalities, Kiev, Chernigov, Galicia. Here, princes who often quarreled with one another for scraps of power now tried to unite against the invaders. They gathered a host, perhaps 40,000 strong, and marched to meet the strangers on the Kalka River. It was a mistake. At the Kalka, Subutai and Jebe repeated the old dance. They retreated for days, drawing the Rus deeper into exhaustion and disorder. The princes believed the Mongols were finally beaten. Then, on the wide plain by the river, the trap snapped shut once more. The Mongols wheeled, surrounded, and destroyed. The Rus army broke and scattered, leaving the field piled with corpses. Several princes were captured alive. The Mongols did not spill their blood. Instead, they bound them under wooden boards and feasted atop them, crushing them slowly to death. The message was clear. The Mongols were not raiders. They were executioners sent by the sky. After the victory, Subutai and Jebe did not linger. Their orders were not to hold, but to terrify, to test, to see. Having shown their strength, they turned back east, retracing their steps across the steppe, carrying with them the knowledge of new lands and new enemies. The Rus would not forget the Khalkha. Nor would Europe. For the first time, whispers of the Mongols reached as far as Hungary, Poland, even the courts of Rome and Paris. Rumors of horsemen from the east, led by a king who called himself Genghis, who fought with the speed of lightning and the cruelty of demons. But Europe had not yet seen the full storm. Subutai would return, years later, with an army vast enough to shake Christendom itself. Genghis Khan, meanwhile, had returned to the steppe. His empire stretched from the Yellow River to the Caspian Sea, the greatest realm the world had ever known. He was older now, his beard streaked with white, his body scarred from decades of war. Yet his mind was sharp, his will unbent. He looked upon the world and saw still more work to be done. The Jin dynasty had been broken but not destroyed. The Tangut kingdom of Xixia, which had once bowed and sworn loyalty, now wavered in its tribute. And Genghis Khan could not tolerate betrayal. In 1226, he turned his armies once again against the Tangut. It was to be his final campaign. The Mongols descended upon Xixia with the fury of years past. City after city fell. The Tangut king sent pleas for mercy, but they were ignored. The Khan had not forgotten broken promises. This time, there would be no surrender accepted, no mercy given. Even as illness gripped him, some say from a fall from his horse, others from fever, Genghis Khan continued to lead. He was carried on a litter to oversee sieges, his eyes burning with the same fire that had guided him since boyhood. By 1227, the Tangut kingdom was destroyed, its rulers executed, its cities leveled, its people scattered. Xixia was erased from history, and there, amid the dust and smoke of victory, the great Khan died. The details are cloaked in mystery. Some say he succumbed to illness. Others whisper of wounds that festered. The truth is lost, for his death was kept secret until his army had completed the war. His body was carried back to Mongolia under heavy guard. According to legend, every man and beast who saw the funeral procession was killed to preserve the secret. His tomb was hidden, perhaps in the sacred Burkhan Khaldan mountain, its location never revealed. But though his body was buried, his name was not. By the time of his death, Genghis Khan had forged an empire that stretched across more than half the known world. His laws bound nomads and city dwellers alike. His armies had crushed kingdoms and shattered dynasties. His vision of unity under the eternal blue sky lived on in his sons and grandsons, who would carry his conquests even farther, into China, Persia, the Middle East, and the heart of Europe. The boy Temujin, once abandoned to hunger on the steppe, had become a ruler who bent the world to his will. The eternal blue sky watched, and the earth remembered. Genghis Khan was gone, but the empire of the Mongols had only just begun. When the eternal blue sky finally took Genghis Khan in 1227, the world he left behind trembled. His death was not a simple passing of a warlord. It was the death of a man who had reshaped the map, the fate of nations, and the rhythm of life itself. Yet his story did not end in the Tangut deserts. What mattered just as much as his victories was the aftermath, the empire he left behind. Its order, its chaos, its vision, and its terror. At his death, Genghis Khan ruled more territory than any conqueror before him. From the Korean peninsula to the Caspian Sea, his banners flew. It was not just raw land, but a network of peoples. Mongols, Turks, Persians, Chinese, Tanguts, Khitans, and countless others. Nomads and farmers, Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, Taoists, and shamans alike now lived under the shadow of his name. This diversity was both a strength and a challenge. The Khan had bound them together with a code, the Yasa, his great law. Though not a written code in the way of city dwellers, the Yasa lived in memory and practice. Loyalty to the Khan, protection of envoys and merchants, harsh punishment for theft or betrayal, and the duty of all to military service when called. It was a glue, uniting the steppe's wild freedom with the order of empire. His empire was not just a realm of destruction, as enemies told it, but also of strange stability. Roads that had once been perilous became safe under Mongol patrols. Traders could ride from the gates of China to the edge of Persia with a passport bearing the Khan seal, and be protected. The Silk Road, long fractured by warring states, was reborn under Mongol watch. But no matter how vast an empire, its survival depends on what comes after the founder. Genghis Khan had many sons, but the question of succession was never simple. By Mongol custom, his empire was not a single crown passed to one heir, but a great inheritance divided among his sons and their descendants. His chosen successor was Ogdi, his third son. Temujin had always seen in Ogdi a balance of strength and wisdom, a man not only a warrior but a builder, capable of ruling an empire rather than just winning battles. His other sons, Joki, Chagatai, Talyui, each received their own ulus, vast lands to govern. Joki, though eldest, had always been shadowed by doubt over his paternity, a tension that would later fracture the empire. When the Khan's funeral rites were complete, the generals and princes swore loyalty to Ogdi as Great Khan. The decision was practical. Without unity, the empire would splinter. And for a time, under Ogdi's reign, the Mongol storm grew even greater, sweeping into Eastern Europe and smashing the Song dynasty's defenses in China. But beneath the victories lay the seeds of future quarrels. Rivalries among the brothers' descendants, ambitions that would one day fracture the great unity of Genghis Khan. To those who had suffered under the Khan's armies, his legacy was terror. Whole cities remembered only fire and ash, pyramids of skulls, the sound of hoofbeats at dawn. Chroniclers in Persia, Rus, and the Islamic world wrote of him as scourge and demon, a punishment sent by God. But to the Mongols and their allies, his memory was sacred. He was not merely a conqueror but the man who had brought order to the steppe, who had raised their people from scattered clans to rulers of the world. His laws preserved discipline, his vision created unity, his merit-based system allowed commoners to rise as generals and advisors. He had also begun a world where ideas traveled as fast as caravans. Chinese engineers built siege engines in Persia. Muslim scholars served in China. Merchants carried not only silk and silver but also knowledge, astronomy, medicine, mathematics. The Mongol Empire, brutal though it was, opened paths of exchange that had been closed for centuries. In later centuries, even when his empire fractured into khanates, the Yuan dynasty in China, the Golden Horde in Russia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the memory of Genghis Khan bound them all. His bloodline was sacred, his name invoked as the source of legitimacy. And yet, he remained mysterious in death. His burial place was never revealed. According to legend, his funeral procession killed every living being it encountered, so that no witness might live to betray the secret. Some say he rests beneath the sacred Burkhan Khaldan mountain in Mongolia, his grave hidden beneath forest and stone. Others whisper of rivers diverted to flow over his tomb, erasing every trace. The secrecy only deepened his legend. He had been larger than life, and in death he became almost myth. For centuries, Mongols rode into battle crying his name, believing his spirit watched from the eternal blue sky. What he left behind was not peace, but change. Empires rose and fell, but the Mongol Empire had carved deep scars and roads alike into the earth. It forced Europe and Asia into contact, spreading technologies, plagues, languages, and religions across continents. The world before Genghis Khan and the world after him were not the same world. His legacy is paradox. To some, he was a destroyer beyond compare, a man whose armies erased civilizations. To others, he was a lawgiver, a visionary, a unifier who bound the steppes and opened the Silk Road. Both are true, for his shadow was both sword and bridge. 8 centuries later, his blood still flows in millions across Eurasia. His name still stirs awe, fear, pride, and controversy. Genghis Khan had once told his sons, "A man's greatest happiness is to conquer his enemies, to seize their horses, and to enjoy their treasures." But beyond conquest, perhaps his truest legacy was that he had taken the scattered peoples of the steppe, poor, ignored, fragmented, and carved their name into history forever. He left behind an empire. He left behind terror. He left behind order. He left behind legend. And above all, he left behind a truth the world could not forget. That even from the wildest corners of the earth, a man could rise to shake the foundations of the world.